Welcome to Chapter 8, Communication. It is a short heading, but a lot of content. Communication, there's a lot to unpack here. Okay, let's jump in. So, for this chapter, we're going to talk about interpersonal communication process, common communication barriers, and gateways through them, differences between non-defensive and defensive communication. We're talking about the impact of nonverbal communication, huge, how social media and communication technologies affect communication, and communication skills of effective managers. Okay, shocker, surprise, surprise. We're going to start with a model here, which is available in your textbook, as always. The interpersonal communication model, figure 8.1, the basic intercommunication model. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have the communicator, or the person trying to convey the information. And the first thing they have is a message. They have thoughts, ideas, feelings. They're going to communicate those things through words, pictures, and gestures. Then we're going to get to the transmit message. And this is the magical part of the model, right? This is what is being used to transmit the message. Is it face-to-face? We're sitting down for a coffee. Is it over the phone? Do I zip you a text message? Is it an email, a tweet, a Snapchat? What is it in which I am transmitting the message? And then on the other side is the receiver. And so they're going to receive the words and pictures and symbols and gestures, and they have to decode those into a message. So they're trying to take those words and pictures and symbols and turn them into thoughts, ideas, and feelings. And let's face it, sometimes it's easy. We deal with people who are effective communicators. It is very clear what they're saying. It is very easy interpreting the message. And then other times it is extremely difficult. For example, in a text message that is a couple lines, and it is just hard to get to what do they mean by this message. And so the greater degree of overlap in these two circles, the better the person understands. The closer the original communicator's thoughts, ideas, and feelings are to the interpretation of that information by the receiver, the better. And sometimes the receiver gives feedback. So it's easy because the feedback person might respond to the original message and say, maybe it's vague. I didn't receive all of it. Can you be more specific? Can you give me some more information? Or it's completely clear. I 100% agree. So this feedback is also critical, right? The receiver is communicating with the original communicator. It's kind of going back the other way now. It's turning into a circle, and they are responding with feedback saying, yes, I got you 100%. I can understand what you're saying, or I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not even sure who sent me this text message. Okay, moving on. Okay, so more with the model. This is really interesting. There's something called perceptual screens, and they are really subconscious filters through which we interpret the world, right? You have to understand our brain is not a recorder. It is not like when you pull up your phone and record a video of someone. That is completely accurate. Our brain perceives information. It comes in, we interpret it, we change it. And the communicator and receiver's perceptual screens, whatever their perception of the world is and what their viewpoint is, will influence the quality, accuracy, and clarity of the messages sent between them, right? Your perceptual screen and the screen of the person talking to you have a huge influence on what you are perceiving as the message. Language is a big part of it. Sometimes someone's talking to you and they're using specific acronyms or jargon or language that you don't understand, or maybe they're using a culturally specific word or something that has to do with a region within Canada or another country that is specific to that region. And that makes it hard for people to understand when they're using language that they're not familiar with, right? They're being communicated in ways in which they don't understand the various meanings of the language. And then the other component is the data, right? What information is that person trying to transmit to the other person? Um, and then you can look at mediums, and the medium is how is it being communicated? Face to face, which is considered a very rich way of communicating because you're getting not only the words, you're getting the facial expressions, you're getting um, maybe body language, you're getting tonality, all sorts of things that way. And then probably the poorest way to communicate, which I have alluded to earlier, is maybe a text message or an email, because it's very hard to understand sometimes what people are saying. And similar to the last slide, the greater the overlap between these two circles, the greater the overlap between the communicator's perceptual screen and the receiver's perceptual screen, the better um, the information is communicated. Okay, there's a number of barriers to communication. So things that make communication more difficult. I mean, the first one, is kind of obvious. Um, physical separation, and in that way, you can't communicate face to face. You can't see each other, so maybe you're talking over the phone, or through text message, maybe through a screen. So being physically separated is the first one. Status separation, means that maybe you are at a higher or lower economic status, or maybe a higher or lower status within an organization. And maybe you go to visit the boss and the boss is talking to you and all you hear is, you're trying not to screw up. You don't necessarily hear the whole conversation because you're not really focused on what they're saying. You're focused on, you know, the status difference, right? Or meeting someone famous, maybe. You don't really hear what they're saying because you're so freaked out that you're meeting someone who's famous. The next one is perceptual screens. We talked about that in the previous slide. And listen, we all have our biases, we all have our stereotypes, and these sometimes interfere with us communicating with people, both in what we say and the way we receive information. We all have biases and those stereotypes that definitely impact what we hear. Information overload. I am sure as college students, you experience this all the time. Just too much information being thrown at you at one time. And you just have a limited capacity for absorbing all of it and sorting through it and using that information, right? It's just too much too quickly. Emotion and mood. Yeah, listen, we all have days in which we are off. And if we're having a bunch of negative emotions and feeling really down, we aren't the best listeners. But the opposite is also true. If we're super positive and having a great day, then we are completely open, and it is very easy to understand what people are saying, or at least a lot easier. Communication styles is one. How are people communicating? Some people, they talk about maybe a masculine form of communicating in which they're very straightforward. Maybe the pace of words is more direct. They're very cut to the chase type thing, get to the point, versus feminine. A feminine type of way of communicating is maybe they're more empathetic, they're more agreeable, they're better at listening, they're more interested in developing a relationship with that person, or making sure that they are being heard and their feelings are being understood. So even the way people communicate will affect how well they communicate with others. Cultural diversity, yeah. If we're talking to someone from a different culture, sometimes They use different languages. They definitely have different hand signals and gestures and body language. So that's definitely something that impacts the way you communicate. And then, of course, the language we use, right? We talked about this previously. If you're in an industry that's very technical, you might use certain jargon. You might use specific definitions that are not always understood by the general public unless you have studied that same language or material. Okay, so gateways to communication. What makes communication better? And what is funny about this slide is, if you've noticed, it has the exact same picture as the previous slide, which is a guy yelling at a wall. So I'm not, you would think they would get a better picture because now we're having gateways, right? Like this is how to improve it. So the first one is be aware of the barriers to communication. So step one, be aware of these barriers. And if you're aware of these barriers, you can avoid them. Step two, engage in active listening. What is active listening? Active listening is using words like I understand what you're saying, nodding your head, saying all those things where you are acknowledging what the person is saying. Choose appropriate language. Yeah, know your audience and don't use a bunch of jargon or terminology if you're talking to people who do not know that. When possible, use mediums that increase the richness of the exchange, right? If you have the opportunity to talk face to face, you might do that instead of zipping a text message or sending an email. And I often tell people this: if it's very, very important, don't send an email, don't text, pick up the phone, drive over to someone's house, jump on a FaceTime or a Zoom call or something, because it's much more important to have a rich level of communication when you're trying to talk about something that is so, so important. Provide feedback. So when someone is saying something, clarify. Is this what you mean? No, I'm not sure. Can you explain this again? And seek feedback, right? You have a conversation with someone and you say, am I coming through clearly? Do you completely understand what I'm saying? Is there anything that we've covered that I need to provide more information about, right? Using those types of prompts will improve your level of communication. Okay, defensive communication. Just the sound of that is not good. Any slide that has threat in the middle of it is definitely something negative. And so this is a situation where we're communicating with someone and we're ridiculed or criticized, and maybe the ideas that we put forth, they're kind of shot down and they're not presented as being very valuable. Then we become negative and we start reacting in a negative way. And it causes a little bit of a cycle that really damages communication. In the first, and once it leads to this defensive type of communication, individuals attempt to avoid communicating with people, and they do that because they're perceived to be under a threat, or that they need to behave, kind of protect themselves because they've thrown an idea out there, and maybe the boss has said, "Listen, that is the dumbest idea I've heard all month. Go to your office, think about it a bit more, and come back with something that makes sense." And when you're put in that type of situation, you become defensive, right? And the threat starts in the middle, and people take two directions. They take either an aggressive or hostile stance, and that's when they get into the type of communication where they're trying to win or dominate or be right all the time. They're just very direct and say, this is the way things are. If you don't like it, go find another job. And then the passive way that people respond is they avoid an exchange whenever possible. And they don't show up to meetings, they don't return calls or emails because they're just completely withdrawing from the communication in order to defend themselves. And here are some classic defensive tactics. So power plays are tactics used to manipulate other people. Labeling is done to try to kind of diminish what other people are saying, listen, you're kind of paranoid or insane, or maybe you have a disability, so they're labeling it. You could also use mislabeling is another way to do that, and that's when people intentionally fail to provide accurate information or give inaccurate information, trying to mislead people. Scapegoating is a pretty common one, and that's when they're trying to shift responsibility of maybe something you did wrong to another person. And then we've also been in situations where people try to make a joke of it, right? They're passive aggressive, and they try to just laugh it off, right? If someone comes and tries to criticize them or say, here's an area which you can prove, they they just laugh it off and make a joke, or even worse, they make fun of other people that are in the workplace, and they use that as a way to kind of deflect attention. Maybe I had a dumb idea, but look at Jim over there. Jim hasn't had a good idea in a month. I don't even know why that guy shows up to work. And then everybody starts laughing, and they say, "Oh, listen, it's just a joke." But in reality, it's damaging not only that person's self-esteem, but the way the workforce communicates with one another. Okay, non-defensive communication. Look at how happy that guy is standing up, the double fist pump, everyone is clapping. So what are some things that you can do to avoid these defensive communication tactics? So focus on the message. That's a great way to do it. Is whatever you're trying to communicate, that's what your message should be. Try to remain focused on that and not go on a lot of tangents, because it's hard to follow along when people are often going off on huge tangents about things. Be assertive, not aggressive. Yeah, just be confident in your communication and straightforward and loud, well, loud, but loud enough for people to hear, but not aggressive. Be direct, but not defensive, and be honest, and don't be angry. Listen, nobody likes the angry person in the office yelling and screaming. Yeah, assertive, direct, and honest. I think that's good advice. And of course, there is a whole nonverbal side of communication. And people often say that a lot more is communicated through nonverbal communication than it is through the words we speak. So, kinesthetics is the gestures, the facial expressions, the posture. Paralegal is the pitch, the tempo, the volume, how we're speaking, excited. Like, you can hear excitement in people's voice, or boredom if they're flat. And then proxemics, intimate space, personal distance, social distance, and public distance. That is the study of individuals' kind of use of space, right? Like, are they leaning forward? Are they engaged? Are they kind of sitting back? And depending on the culture, this is what's so interesting, is that those types of spaces are different. So you really have to get an idea of what is the appropriate space. And I'll tell you, after spending time in Canada, our space is big. Like, you want to leave a lot of space for people in lines and all the rest of it. In other countries that have a lot more people, that space is not the same. People in lines in stores and concerts and train stations and buses are packed in there, and they have to be. If you've ever seen the pictures of people in Japan being shoved into the subway by people that work there, they definitely have a different perception of personal space. Okay, social media. This is gigantic. This has a huge impact on communication. there's a whole generation of people who were born before 1980 who've been living with technology their whole entire life. And those people are very comfortable with it. In contrast, people who are older don't have the same level of comfort. The other thing to keep in mind when it comes to social media is you have to understand that it is public, right? It is not like exchanging an email in an organization. If you zip it out on social media, it is out there for the whole world to see. In the way, there's also a lot less barriers, right? Like now you communicate with someone halfway across the world. They don't have to be in your internal system. It removes a lot of the barriers to communication. So there are benefits and there are drawbacks, like everything. It's equalizing, meaning that no matter who you are, how much money you have, a lot of social media is free, so everyone can participate and has input. It reduces these barriers to communication. You don't have to be anxious about your the way you're communicating, the language or the culture. All of that goes away. And then it's a lot easier to break down social norms. Like you can communicate with people of different status, like I said, different countries, different languages. There's less reluctance to communicate. The drawbacks are a number as well. So impulsivity, meaning that you often do it without thinking, in that it's not always civil, right? You could say something hurtful to someone through a social media post that you might not say face to face. You don't have to identify yourself, which is another drawback. People bullying each other online and following people and putting nasty stuff for sure. And then there's a lot of uncertainty of maybe the message and the meaning, because it's not a very rich way to communicate. We've talked about rich ways to communicate in which there is some verbal information, there's some visual information, as well as maybe some text or written. But in this case, it's largely just a photo or a little bit of text. Okay, and finally, effective communication skills. So effective communication is in the middle of the diagram here. And in order to be an effective communicator, you have to be expressive, empathetic, sensitive. You must be persuasive, kind of assertive, and informative. Like you must have good information, right? It can't be something that's all fluff. So effective managers have all of these things. They're expressive, they're empathetic, they're persuasive, and they're informative. They keep their employees well informed. They keep their organization well informed. They're transparent. They communicate openly and honestly about what they expect, about their feelings. And this all increases the trust in an organization and the engagement. So the better you are at communicating, the healthier your organization is, especially if you're in a managerial role and you do a lot of the communicating. You want to make sure that people understand you and that they feel valued and understood as well. Okay, that was an overview of communication. There is a lot here, some things that you should definitely dig into a little bit more. It is such an important skill to learn, and I'm telling you, if you become a good communicator and an effective communicator, you will have a long and happy career. Any questions, as always, do not hesitate to reach out and ask, and have yourself a great rest of the day.